Jonathan Hale didn't like mornings. But that Tuesday he woke earlier than usual, his heart beating fast, as if warning him that something was wrong. He stepped out onto the balcony of his 79th floor penthouse and watched the sunlight slowly flood New York City. The city was his chessboard, each skyscraper a piece he had once placed there through his development empire. But this morning everything seemed different, colder, even stranger. The phone rang so loudly that he almost dropped his cup of coffee. "Mr. Hale?" The secretary's voice trembled. "You need to come to the office. It's important." "What happened?" "The SEC came with a warrant. They're seizing documents. And Miss Margaret from the Financial, she signed a plea agreement with the prosecution witness." Jonathan froze. "Margaret? His right-hand man for 10 years? She said, what did I?" His voice trailed off. "She said you knew about the fake accounts. What did you?" "Enough." He hung up the phone. Fragments of the past few months began to appear in his mind. Margaret's strange meetings without his knowledge, the closed safes, the new account numbers he hadn't asked about. He hadn't touched any of the gray schemes, at least not directly. He didn't need to. The money was flowing in like a river. But now it would look like a conspiracy in the press, like a crime. He rushed into the dressing room, put on the dark blue suit he always wore to court, and pulled his tie so tight that his throat tightened. The elevator took him down to the lobby, where a black car with tinted windows was already waiting. The driver had the same look on his face as doctors who don't reveal their diagnoses. The office was in chaos. An agent in a dark suit was flipping through his personal letters. Another was copying data from a laptop. On the table was a copy of the warrant, which read in black and white. Suspected of fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. "Mr. Hale, we advise you to cooperate," the lead agent said without looking up. "You don't even know what you're looking for. We'll find it." Jonathan tried not to show fear. He had always believed that the world was a bargain. You give something, you get something in return. But now, for the first time in 20 years, he was not in control of the terms. That same evening, the phones began to ring one after another. Investors were breaking contracts, friends were disappearing, and the news was calling him the tycoon on the verge of falling. The worst part was the video. Margaret, in an expensive suit, speaking calmly and coldly into the camera. Jonathan Hale knew, and he was in charge of it personally. His fingers clenched into a fist so hard, he could feel his nails digging into his skin. And for the first time in a long time, he felt not anger but fear. The same fear that a boy from a poor neighborhood had once felt when he was left alone in the middle of a dark street. He knew. Today the hunt had begun, and he was the game. The next few days turned into a sleepless marathon. Jonathan ran between meetings with lawyers, press conferences, and phone calls, trying to put out the fire, but his every step only fanned the flames. His face appeared on screens in bars, taxis, even in the windows of electronics stores, next to headlines. The Fall of Hale's Empire, New York's largest developer at the center of a criminal scandal. He tried to make peace with Margaret. He sent a mutual acquaintance with a proposal to meet without cameras. The answer was short. "Don't come any closer. Otherwise, I'll show you the rest." What the rest was, he did not know, but the phrase fell like an ice cube in his stomach. Details that he himself barely remembered began to appear in the media, about some deals with offshore companies, the sale of land through shell companies, the financing of politicians. He was sure that he had signed these documents once, but then it had seemed ordinary, legal. Now every signature of his looked like the mark of a criminal. The situation with the investors had become catastrophic. Two large partners had sued, demanding the return of $300 million. One of the banks had frozen his personal accounts. Even the security guards in the building were looking at him as if they already knew that the owner had fallen. One evening, he was sitting in his office, filling the silence with shots of whiskey. The call. The number was unknown. "Mr. Hale?" The voice was low, with a slight accent. "Do you know who leaked your offshore documents?" "Who the hell are you?" "A former friend, let's say." "You should know. It wasn't Margaret who started it. It was an order from above." "From above. Someone in Washington wants you gone. You have a much bigger enemy than you think." The line went dead. He sat there, clutching the phone, feeling reality shift. If that was true, then Margaret was just a figurehead. The real player was somewhere out there in the dark, moving the whole game. The next day, another blow. His ex-wife, with whom he had maintained some respect, gave an interview in which she called him a heartless manipulator and implied that he had once threatened her. He couldn't believe she had agreed to this. Trust melted away like snow on asphalt, leaving only dirt. The climax came on Friday. He returned to the penthouse late at night, but the key card didn't work. The concierge, looking away, said, "Excuse me, Mr. Hale. The bank has taken possession of the property. You have to leave the building." His suitcase lay against the wall in the lobby like trash. He stepped outside, the cold Manhattan wind hitting his face. Far away, the subway rumbled, and here, among the skyscrapers, he suddenly felt like the same slum boy he had been before. Only now without a dream, without a home, without a name. For the first time in 20 years, Jonathan Hale realized he was no longer a nobody. Jonathan spent his first night homeless in a cheap motel on the outskirts of Queens. The walls were paper thin, and he could hear someone arguing about money in the next room. It was like an ironic joke. He had once managed hundreds of millions, and now he was listening to two people arguing over a trifle. He was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when there was a knock on the door. "Mr. Hale," a soft, feminine voice said, but it was firm. He opened it. Standing before him was a woman in her 40s, wearing a dark coat with a hood that hid half of her face. Her eyes were cold but attentive. "Who are you?" "My name is Elizabeth Carver. I used to work for your company. You don't remember me, but I remember you. And I know for sure what they set you up for." She entered without asking permission and threw an old leather briefcase on the table. "Here are documents you've never seen. They relate to your projects in Hong Kong, Dubai, and Miami. They're essentially shadow deals that were made under your name, but without your involvement. And, most importantly, here are copies of emails between Margaret and," she looked him straight in the eye, "the Undersecretary of the Treasury." Jonathan opened the first file and saw his electronic signature on a deal he'd never signed. The date matched the day he'd been in Geneva. The signature had been forged so skillfully that even he would have believed it. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. "You fired me 5 years ago, but without shame." They said, "In this game, it's more important to stay human than to stay in the game." At the time, I thought those were just fancy words. Now I see you were right. She told me that after she was released, she had been involved in a money laundering investigation in the construction sector. And she had stumbled upon a scheme in which Hale was just a front for a much larger network. Meeting him now was as dangerous for her as it was for him. "If this information falls into the right hands," she said, "it could take down whoever started it." But there was a problem. The right hands aren't the police. They're already part of this game. He realized that for the first time in a week, he wasn't feeling fear, but something else, a slight shiver of knowing there was at least some beacon in the darkness. And at the same time, an anger that was beginning to rise from the depths like red-hot iron. "Then we'll find another way," he said. "But if I go for it, there's no turning back." Elizabeth smiled faintly. "You've already crossed that line, Jonathan." That night he sat over the documents, laying out a scheme before him. Shell companies, fictitious tenders, offshore accounts, and at the center, a few names he knew personally. And among them, a politician he had once considered a friend, almost a brother. The revelation was a shock. The conspiracy he had been drawn into went much deeper than he had thought. And now he knew who he was playing against. Jonathan and Elizabeth worked almost without sleep for a week. They met in dark cafes by the harbor, hid their laptops in toolboxes, spoke in whispers even when no one was around. Every step was a risk, every call a possible leak. They decided to work through an independent journalist, a man Elizabeth knew from her construction investigations. His name was Michael Sloan. A former war correspondent who had lost a leg in Iraq, he now wrote only what the major newspapers didn't dare print. He was trusted by those who trusted no one. The meeting took place in an old warehouse in Brooklyn. The air was filled with the smell of metal and dust. Jonathan laid out all the documents in front of Michael, told him everything: the forged signatures, the political pressure, the secret accounts. Michael listened in silence, sometimes only briefly asking questions. "Do you understand that if I publish this, you might just be wiped out?" he said finally. "If you don't, I'll be wiped off the face of the earth slowly and without a trace. At least that way I'll have a chance." Michael nodded and took the flash drive. But the next day, things didn't go according to plan. The news broke, but not the one they had expected. Someone had leaked the materials selectively, removing key evidence and making Jonathan an even bigger criminal. Now he was portrayed not as the victim of the conspiracy, but as the main organizer. It was a trap, Elizabeth said quietly, reading the headlines. They knew we were preparing to publish. Michael either sold out or was forced to. I don't believe he betrayed, Jonathan replied, but inside he already knew there was no room for naivety in this game. They were left with the only option, to speak out publicly themselves. Not through a newspaper, not through the right people, but directly. Jonathan agreed to be interviewed live on a small independent online channel. It meant the end of anonymity, the end of any chance of escape. That evening, before the broadcast, he stood in front of the mirror in his dressing room. His face looked 10 years older, the wrinkles deep, his eyes dark with sleeplessness. But there was something new in his gaze, determination. Elizabeth came in and put a photo on his desk, he and that politician, a former friend, laughing at a hotel opening. Show this on air. People need to see who you've been covering for. When the live broadcast began, he spoke slowly, without loud words, but every sentence was like a punch. He named names, showed documents, explained the scheme. And in the end he said, I can lose everything, but the one thing I will not allow is for those who did not even know that they were playing this game to pay for my silence. 15 minutes later, the broadcast was stopped. The studio was surrounded by unknown people in the dark. Elizabeth grabbed his hand. We have a minute to disappear. They ran out the back door, and Jonathan understood. From now on, it was either victory or the end. They took shelter in an abandoned house near the Hudson. The wind blew through the broken windows. The rain ran down the walls, turning dust into mud. Jonathan sat on the floor, his back against the cold brick, listening to the dull thud of old water pipes in the darkness. Somewhere far away, across the river, the lights of the city flickered, the same city that had once been his chessboard and now played against him. Elizabeth quietly entered, holding an old laptop in her hands. Your broadcast is live on the internet. It was downloaded by hundreds of thousands of people before it was deleted. But that wasn't enough. Not enough for what? He asked. For justice. They're already attacking, twisting the facts, starting new scandals. Justice is a marathon, and we're running without shoes. He was silent. It seemed to him that the whole point of the fight was fading. Yes, his words were heard, but would it change anything? Would anyone dare to challenge a system that weaponizes truth against those who speak it? You could always disappear, she said after a pause. You still have friends in Europe, money they haven't found. You could start a new life. He smiled bitterly. And leave them to win. I've already lived for myself. Do you know what the worst part is? He looked up. Being rich and thinking your honesty is your property, and then finding out it can be bought, counterfeited, or taken away like everything else. That night he recorded a video message. No studio lights, no tie. Just him, a dark room, and a lamp flickering in the wind. He spoke not as a businessman, but as a man who had lost everything and seen the value of the truth. He didn't ask for support. He didn't make excuses. He just urged those who still could not remain silent, even if the price was unbearable. The video spread even faster than the previous broadcast, and with it came new threats and signed messages, black cars parked under the windows. Elizabeth warned, if you stay in the city, you will either be arrested or, and if I leave, I will be left with a lie. He interrupted. I am not running away this time. He was last seen on the steps of the city hall, where he was trying to hand over copies of documents to a group of activists. After that, there was silence. Some say he disappeared, others that he was removed. Elizabeth left his last recording in the public domain. And there were words that are still quoted today. Wealth is but a mirror. It shows not what you are, but what you are willing to become in order to keep it. If you have to choose between truth and what you call success, remember, success ends with you. Truth does not. And here is the dilemma that remains after him. Is it possible to be rich and honest? And if you can, how much is such honesty worth in a world where truth has a price?